French troops were forced out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger under a wave of anti-colonial anger, with revolutionary leaders in the Alliance of Sahel States tearing up all the defense deals and telling Paris its era of open control was over. Yet today, France is quietly drawing a map to look back into the same Sahel airspace it just lost, without landing a single soldier on AES soil. In mid-February 2026, France and Algeria agreed to reactivate high-level security cooperation mechanisms covering intelligence, policing, counter-terrorism, and migration. On paper, it looks like a normal reset between a former colonizer and its old colony after years of tension over history, Western Sahara, and visas. But while you place that agreement on the map, right above Mali and Niger, now united with Burkina Faso inside the Alliance of Sahel States Confederation, it started to look like something else entirely. What if this northern deal is not just about fighting terror, but about rebuilding French eyes, ears, and leverage just outside the borders of the very bloc that pushed it out? In this episode, we are going to dive deep into how France was expelled from AES space, how a new security pact in North Africa became the quiet comeback route into Sahel skies, and why this matters for African sovereignty from village level to the Mediterranean coast. Stay with this briefing, because a technical deal in Algiers may be the first step in a new struggle over who controls the Sahel sky. French troops did not just leave Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger by accident. They were pushed out by revolutionary leaders who framed their decision as a historic break with the old system of control, often described as Francafrique. One by one, security agreements were torn up. Mali terminated its 2014 defense accord, and French Operation Barkhane forces completed their departure by August 2022. Burkina Faso ended France's military presence in February 2023. Niger revoked its 2012 military cooperation agreement and ordered French troops out by December 2023. Foreign bases were told to pack up, and the Alliance of Sahel States was born on 16 September 2023 through the Liptako-Goma Charter, a direct answer to decades of outside interference. Inside this new alliance, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger began moving towards a confederation formalized by a treaty signed in Niamey on 6 July 2024 and a joint military force. They completed their formal withdrawal from ECOWAS on 29 January 2025. The message was simple. Sahel security would now be handled by Sahel forces, without Western boots on the ground and without distant capitals calling the shots. For many Africans watching from inside the region and across the diaspora, it felt like a long-delayed connection. A moment where sovereignty was finally being backed by action, not just by speeches. But power never leaves a vacuum. While AES leaders celebrate the end of visible French bases on their soil, the question refuses to go away. Would France really accept permanent exclusion from such a strategic corridor? Would a state that has invested so heavily in the Sahel, militarily, economically, and politically, simply walk away and never look back? Hold that thought. Because if the alliance slammed the southern door on French troops, it was only a matter of time before Paris searched for another entrance. And documents, high-level visits, and new language coming out of North Africa suggest that the route back into Sahel skies may already be opening, just from a different direction. On paper, the new arrangement between France and Algeria looks like just another counter-terrorism and security package. Officials talk about intelligence sharing, joint policing, border management, and cooperation against armed groups operating across the Sahara Belt. It is presented as a technical response to real threats, trafficking routes, extremist cells, and unstable frontiers. Behind closed doors, however, this kind of deal is quietly framed in very different terms. By securing basin access, overflight corridors, drone deployment, or shared intelligence hubs in North Africa, Paris regains a way to see, track, and pressure developments far to the south in the same Sahel space from which its forces were pushed out. Without a single French soldier inside AES borders, the reach above AES territory begins to return through the northern rim of the map. You do not need to be inside the house to know what is happening. You know that, right? You just need a window that looks in. And Algeria's geography is that window. Locally, the language remains familiar. Combating terrorism, dismantling smuggling networks, and stabilizing a fragile region. In European capitals, the message is that these renewed links will help manage a Sahel now led by revolutionary leaders who have turned away from Western military structures. Between those two narratives lies a quiet workaround. Influence without basis, presence without flags on the ground. The question then is not only what is written in the text of these agreements, but, for lack of a better word, how they are used in practice. Because once you lay these northern arrangements over a map of AES territory, a very different picture begins to appear. An invisible arc of access and surveillance that stretches right over the heads of the very leaders who thought they had shut the door. Now, zoom out on the region and patterns start to form. With Sahel capitals refusing new French bases, attention shifts to the air base above and the seas to the north. Airfields on the Mediterranean coast, naval assets on nearby waters, and intelligence sites in North African states can all be linked into networks that look southward, deep into the Sahel, without any official return announced on the ground. Through what strategists call an over-the-horizon posture, aircraft, drones, and surveillance systems positioned in North Africa can track movements across borders, monitor key roads, and map out resource corridors inside AES territory. Officially, this is framed as protection against cross-border terrorism. But in practice, it offers outside powers a detailed view of how the new Sahel security architecture is taking shape, where troops move, where new alliances form, and where critical assets are located. The same technology that can find a terrorist convoy can also track a mining shipment or a diplomatic motorcade. This shift did not come out of nowhere. As Western forces faced mounting resistance in the Sahel, they began searching for new staging grounds along the Mediterranean rim, closer to European homelands, yet still within reach of African theaters. North African partners, with their own interests and pressures, became central to that rethink. For AES leaders, the challenge is clear. Even if foreign bases leave their soil, how much control do they truly have over their skies if neighboring states host powerful militaries just beyond the horizon? And if airspace above the Sahel becomes a corridor managed from the north, then the real contest may no longer be about boots on the ground at all, but about who can watch, deter, and shape events from above. Behind every joint patrol, radar field, and security committee sits a set of deeper European anxieties. The Sahel and the belt that runs through North Africa are not just zones of conflict. They are corridors for gas, uranium, other strategic minerals, and human movement towards Europe's southern shores. When France retook its presence through northern security deals, it is also protecting stakes tied to energy and migration. Routes that begin around Sahel mines and fields that run northwards feed into pipelines, shipping lanes, and complex supply chains. Niger alone has been one of Europe's key uranium sources. Francis Orano, formerly Areva, operated mines in Agadez region for decades, and Niger supplied a significant share of the fuel for France's nuclear power fleet, which generate roughly 70% of the country's electricity at the same time. People fleeing conflict, poverty, or climate shocks move along the Sahel Maghreb Mediterranean axis, hoping to cross into Europe. And any stability in this claim is quickly framed in Europe politics as a security emergency, a migration crisis, or a threat to energy supply. A security pact in North Africa gives Paris more than just tactical visibility. It offers leverage over how migration is policed, how narratives about Sahel instability are shaped, and how flows of resources are monitored. While AES builds its own military and economic structures to escape external control, France and its partners work to hold on to key choke points. Not through open colonial-style bases, but through strategic positions that control what moves and who moves. This is why many Pan-African observers see continuity rather than rupture. The methods are updated, the language is softer, but the logic of Fran-Afrique still appears in the background, and that is influence maintained through control of routes and pressure points. The uniform changes, but the posture remains the same. And as this northern architecture expands, it collides directly with the alliance's ambitions to build a security order grounded in independent African command. In Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey, the story sounds very different. Revolutionary leaders there present the Alliance of Sahel States as a break with the old era, not just a temporary response. They speak of a confederation, a joint force of thousands strong, and a security model led by Africans who patrol their own borders, control their own skies, and sign their own deals on their own terms. On 20th December 2025, the AES launched a 5,000-strong unified military force. On December 23, 2025, they activated the Confederal Investment and Development Bank, which is the BCID-AES, with initial capital of 500 billion CFA francs, roughly $820 to $900 million. For supporters of this project, turning away from long-standing Western military frameworks is not just symbolic. It is meant to be the foundation of a new Pan-African security bloc, where strategic decisions about troops, bases, and alliances are made in Sahel's capitals, not in European ministries. Partnerships with Russia through the African Corps, Turkey on drone procurement, and Iran on defense and energy cooperation are presented as tools to diversify support, resist pressure from former colonial powers, and avoid returning to one-sided dependency. The rhetoric centers on sovereignty, decolonization, and dignity. The message to outside powers is that African land and airspace should no longer be treated as theaters where external actors can come and go at will. Yet, while this vision takes shape on the ground, France explores northern agreements that allow it to keep a hand near the Sahel switchboard, even if it no longer sits at the corridor. What emerges is not just a simple standoff, but a clash between two security worlds. One still relies on networks tied to Paris and Brussels, using North Africa as a bridge. The other is anchored in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, pushing for an order where African blocs write their own rules. And whenever such competing designs meet, the lines on the map rarely change quietly. While diplomats negotiate frameworks and generals redraw maps, ordinary people feel the impact in much more immediate ways. On the Mediterranean coast, fishermen watch patrol boats and surveillance aircraft become a more constant presence. In Sahel towns, herders and traders navigate checkpoints, new identity control, and rumors of drones scanning the skies above their gazing routes. The shadow war is invisible to those making the decisions, but it is very visible to those living under it. Intensified security cooperation in North Africa often translates into tighter migration controls and harsher policing along the routes used by those trying to reach Europe. Systems set up in the name of combating trafficking can end up sweeping up people seeking work or safety, pushing them into a more dangerous path. At sea, interceptions and forced returns becomes more frequent. In border zones, the line between counter-terror operations and political repressions can blur, with activists and communities caught in the middle. At the same time, AES resistance to Western military presence and France's search for alternative entry points risk turning the wider region into overlapping spheres of influence. Communities on both sides of the Sahara find themselves squeezed between the security doctrines of African revolutionary leaders, European interior ministries, and non-Western partners with their own priorities. From a Pan-African perspective, the core questions are brutally simple. Who actually benefits from these arrangements? And who pays the price? For many, the answer is visible in everyday life. In restricted movements, economic strain, and the feeling that once again, decisions about African land, seas, and air are being made far away from those who live under them. France may be testing a northern route back into the airspace, but the final lines on this map will not be decided by Paris alone. They will be shaped by how African states, regional blocs, social movements, and diaspora networks respond to this new phase. The Alliance of Sahel States could extend its influence towards North Africa, inspiring other governments to distance themselves from other security frameworks. Or parts of the continent could slide into a hybrid model, where some capitals welcome renewed French cooperation, while others push it back to the margins. Among Pan-African movements and AES supporters, the maneuvers unfolding today are seen in two competing ways. For some, they look like a last attempt to preserve the habits of France-Afrique by shifting the staging ground. But for others, they mark the beginning of a more open contest over who commands African airspace and sets the rules of engagement. A contest in which African blocs are no longer passive objects, but active players. Beneath all the technical language, the real conflict here is about narrative and leverage. Is Africa still a security theater where global powers test strategies and project force? Or is it becoming a patchwork of confident regions that negotiate from a position of strength, including over who watches their skies and patrols their borders? Because in the very end, this story is not just about one deal in North Africa. It is about whether African power can finally be recentered on African decisions. And that is exactly why this briefing exists, to track, expose, and reframe that struggle from an African lens, right to the very last frame. This is Frontline Africa, If this kind of unfiltered Africa First analysis resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. My name is P. Solomon, and I'll see you in the next one.